A few years ago, I was on a date. It was going poorly. I thought about leaving when he told me I looked like I'd been around the block. But I'm glad I didn't, because then he said this. I like to think opinions are like buttholes. Everybody has one. Not necessarily, I said. He was confused, and so are you, because what he didn't know was, under the table, was this. See, I don't have a butthole anymore. I gave up a little over 5 years ago due to savage inflammatory bowel disease. It's called Crohn's disease. So my insides had to be a little rerouted. Inside this bag, there is an opening in my abdomen called a stoma, which is the end of my digestive tract. It sits there like a little squashed red rosebud, and it saved my life. For the longest time, this bag and people knowing about this bag were my biggest fears. This is the first time I've spoken publicly about it, and definitely the first time I've done this in public. It's safe to say I'm very uncomfortable because despite the fact these bags are perfectly hygienic, there is still a massive stigma around them. And because they're fairly easy to conceal, sometimes it's easier to hide. Now, most of you will have met someone who has one of these bags under their clothing. They just probably didn't show it to you. That's because about 8,000 people in Aotearoa, New Zealand, have a stoma, which works out to be about 1 in every 625 people. In the US, it's even higher, 1 in 500. There are a bunch of reasons someone might have one of these. Maybe they had a birth defect, cancer, a traumatic injury to the abdomen, or, like me, some other serious disease affecting their pelvis. They can replace bladder or bowel function. For me, it's bowel. Anything solid I eat ends up in this bag and stays there till I empty it. The downside is you don't get to choose when it happens. It'll happen when it happens. I'm just really hoping it doesn't happen while I'm up here, or I will spend the rest of my life thinking about the time I was shitting on stage while doing a TEDx talk. Now, not all stomas are permanent, but for me, this is for life. I've got what's called a Barbie butt. My butt has been sealed off and is now just for show. I've thought about getting a little tattoo down there that just says, "We've moved." All jokes aside, this happened about 12 years after I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which mostly causes inflammation in the digestive tract. In some cases, including mine, the inflammation can be pretty much anywhere. According to the Global Burden of Disease study, there are about 4.9 million people worldwide who live with inflammatory bowel disease. And each of their journeys will look a little different. This is my journey through what I like to call the Game of Crohn's, hopefully with a better ending. So my diagnosis came in the summer of 2007. I remember being in hospital and I had this short hair, like a little pixie cut with a big side fringe because, it was 2007. And I was so thin that a family friend who came to visit didn't recognize me and left again. She thought I was a little boy. I was almost 17. So for the next decade, I was on a cocktail of medications, which kept the worst of it at bay for a while, but eventually there was no drug left in the country that could control the ulcers in my gut. By the time I was 28, my body was overrun with inflammation. I was losing the Game of Crohn's. It's pretty weird when a surgeon tells you parts of your digestive tract are disintegrating. At this point, I was presented with two options: have a stoma now by choice, or have one later by emergency surgery. I did not fancy either of those options, so I ran away. I pushed back and pushed back to the point I could not eat, I could barely walk, and every bathroom trip resembled a fecal Jackson Pollock. That joke was for 5 people, and 4 of them are in this room. So I gave in, I had the surgery, and sure enough, the section of bowel they removed crumbled as my surgeon pulled it out. And I still couldn't accept I had a stoma. I remember thinking I'd done such a good job of keeping everything inside unseen. Invisible, that was the deal. I was disgusted with my body for betraying me in this way. I remember saying to a nurse who was very gently changing my bag as I had my head turned away, my eyes shut and my nose blocked, I'm going to have to get over this, aren't I? When my rectum was eventually removed, I took it home. My friends and I had a kiss my ass goodbye party. And we buried this crazy looking alien thing underneath a New Zealand native tōtara tree in the backyard. The whole thing was very confusing for my 3-year-old niece, who also wanted to copy Auntie and bury her butt, until I told her she still needed it. What I wasn't prepared for was the amount of grief that came with laying that to rest. This thing represented 15 years of missing out on opportunities, on travel, on relationships, on the job in journalism that I loved, that had quit because of the stress it put on my body. I recognised I'd been going through the stages of grief for years. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression. The last one left was acceptance. I've come to think of all this as my semicolon moment, in both a literal and a poetic sense. So I really thought this would be a full stop, an ending to my freedom, my confidence, my ability to live a full and happy life. But of course, semicolons are a point where a story could end but doesn't. Something else happens afterwards, a new idea informed by the last idea. After the surgery, I started getting better and stronger. I could eat and enjoy food again. My confidence grew. I got therapy and a motorbike, also therapy. Slowly, I was honest with friends and dates. And you know what? No one who's any good cares. The thing I thought would limit me has given me more freedom than ever. My semicolon was my greatest comeback. I had a colonoscopy a few months ago. They found no signs of inflammation. I've never had that result before. But it's not all rosebuds. I still get inflammation popping up in random places, and I still feel like a medical mystery sometimes. But this stuff is no longer my worst fear. That's dead and buried. Because when this disease came for my life, all it got away with was my rectum. Now, when I was preparing this talk, I really was in 2 minds about that big reveal moment because I could feel my insecurities pushing back. But I'd be an asshole if I stood up here for 10 minutes telling you to embrace life outside your comfort zone without getting out of mine. And if I've learnt anything, it's that stigmas will build homes in shadows if we let them. Every year in the US alone, 100,000 people will have stoma surgery. I guarantee every one of them will have some level of anxiety about this. I'm angry that I have to stand up here and pull my bag out to tell them it's going to be okay, because no one told me. No one told me those feelings of grief, anxiety, and shame wouldn't be final. Maybe your semicolon isn't as literal as mine, but chances are at some point you will go through something that scares the shit out of you. And while you don't have to love every minute of it, please talk about it. We have to talk about what we're afraid of, or we will always be scared of those shadows. And maybe your story will be the thing that stops someone's next thing from becoming their last thing. Well, you may remember me as the person who poops into a bag. Now that I have a life, that's actually the least interesting thing about me. I just really hope next time you're facing a situation you didn't sign up for, that you consider it a semicolon, not a full stop. Thank you.